Now, Nigeria's total public debt has hit a record of 152.39 trillion naira as of June 2025. That, the highest ever in naira terms. According to the Debt Management Office, the debt also stands at $99.68 billion in dollar terms, just $400 million, shy of 100 billion at the 100 billion mark. This rising debt is driven by fresh borrowing and the impact of the strengthening exchange rate. The government owes both domestic and foreign creditors, including countries like China, France, Germany, and Japan, as well as multilateral leaders like the World Bank and the African Development Bank. Domestically, Nigeria is borrowing through instruments like FGN Bonds, Treasury Bills, Sukuk, and Green Bonds. Now, two economists, Aliyu, Ilias, and Alesta Wilcox, joins us now to look at the impacts of such debt burdens on Nigeria and her citizens. Gentlemen, you are welcome.
Thank you for having me.
Now, very quickly, I'll start with Alesta. Let's start with Alesta first. Alesta, Nigeria's debt has reached a record of 152.39 trillion naira. Now, in your expert views, is this level of borrowing sustainable?
I have always made the point, and I'm sure many economists will make the point, that debt is not an issue. It is the usage of the debt that becomes an issue. Every developing country, economies will always need debt capital for specific purposes. When you compare our debt today to GDP, it's still within a tolerable limit. So it's a sustainable level of debt. If the utilization of those funds, especially the external debts, are channeled to proper use, for me, that is where the discussion should remain, not if the country is borrowing, because really and truly, government must always borrow. Today, the U.S., which is one of the biggest economies, one of the heaviest debtor in terms of their debt profile. The U.K. has almost 80% of their GDP in debt. So debt is not the issue, and we should not be shy away from debt if the debt is the type that is being used for real development that will be able to pay back both the principal and interest when due. And then for me, that is where the confusion should lie about, not that the debt is high. I mean, yes, if after saying this, it's not as if I encourage frivolous borrowing. In the last few years, in the recent past, since maybe the admin of President Muhammadu Buhari, the country has gone on a borrowing spree. And Nigerians, the question is, what are the impact of these debts in the life of the city of the country? Are we seeing the impact? Because it's not just the borrowing. 152 trillion is still within, I think, within about 10% of our GDP, and so it's not a frightening figure. But the problem is, where is this money being channeled to?
Now, can I ask you, Aliyu, what key indicators should we be watching to assess debt sustainability?
Right. So I think first and foremost, when we said the debts, like you rightly said, debt is never a bad thing. But looking at the level of the debts now, we are beginning to get worried, because if you look at our debts to our revenue, look at debt to GDP, if you also look at all the factors. Now, the indicators that show that debt itself sometimes is not sustainable, if it's not well managed. We look at our fiscal discipline. We must have a better fiscal discipline to actually get ourselves, to the right channel. You also look at it now. We also are oil dependent. It's also an indicator that it's a problem. You also look at our inflation rate. Debt is part of why we are seeing this higher level of inflation, and also our interest rate. So these are indicators. If you look at the interest rate also, it's also an indicator. If you also look at the naira depreciation, it's also an indicator that the debt is getting higher. Because if you look at the depreciation of naira, discover that ideally the more depreciated your currency is, the higher the debt is. So I can tell you that at this point, I think government needs to be caution. And like you rightly said, debt itself is not bad, but what is it actually used for? Is it capital project? Is it other service sector? So we must look at it that every debt we embarked on must not be used for recurrent expenditure, but capital expenditure.
Aliyu, the DMO, let's talk about the DMO. The DMO cites fresh borrowing and exchange rates changes as major drivers. Now, how much of this debt spike is due to currency devaluation versus new loans?
Like I made mention earlier, immediately you have debt burden, and you have naira depreciation. The debt begin to increase if your naira depreciated. Just like our currency was about 500 naira to $1 before. You won't compare that debt at that period to when naira to dollar is 1,500, and that's why we must also make sure that our currency have much more value, because the more the currency depreciates, the more the debt will skyrocket, the more the debt will actually increase, and that's why government must make sure they do all what they can do to make sure that we have supply side of forex, so to say, so that you have a sustainable way of managing the debt. So the more you lost value, the more currency depreciation, the higher the interest rate on those debts that you have been borrowing.
Let's move to you, Alesta. Nigeria is nearing the $100 billion in external debt. What risks do we face if we cross that threshold, especially in today's global financial climate? How do bilateral and multilateral debts like those from China and the World Bank affect us and compare in terms of repayment terms and risks for Nigeria?
Well, if you look at the figures supplied, some of these debts are domestic. They are also part of contractual obligations that the government has within the domestic contractors. So you have a very big chunk of that debt in domestic. Yes, we have quite a sizable number of it in multilateral and bilateral agencies. And I think I still maintain the fact that we are not, yes, it's a concern to everybody, it should be a concern, but we are not in a crisis period as to begin to create the panic that even if it gets the 100 billion, if you get the 100 billion mark, I don't think it's something that will panic, because right now, the government has been able to re-engineer their finance to be able to do more of debt servicing with their resources. Unfortunately, before now, we used to have about 90% revenue to debt services, but I think that figure has come out about 60-65%, if I'm not mistaken, servicing of debt. So with further fees, I will caution that additional borrowing should be checked, because right now I don't see the need. From my position, I don't have a vintage position, but from my general economic position, government revenue has ramped up. We are having quite a substantial amount of revenue since the devaluation of the naira, and since the floating of the naira and the removal of fuel subsidy. We're having quite a substantial amount of resources coming in terms of income. In fact, we've achieved what we've never achieved before in terms of income, and our budget size is growing bigger by the day. A lot of states are having, by next year, when the new tax regime comes into place, states will have quite a substantial amount of revenue accruing to them from taxation and other sources. So I am not in particular understanding why we still have this high level of borrowing. Yes, there may be shocks here and there that the government might need funding to breach. But just like the other guest speaks, it should not be for the current expenditures. We are having this improving revenue drive right now. And so I don't see. And then one other point I want to make here is the fact that let's also be mindful of the fact that
Alesta,
let's also be mindful of the fact that some of these debt belongs to states. state government too goes about borrowing. And of course, the federal government approved those debts for states. And so there needs to be a general review of actual needs as to why states are borrowing some of this money and what they are deploying them to. Because the truth of the matter is Nigerians are not seeing, I'm not seeing the effect of these debts in terms of what they are meant for. Apart from the Chinese Exim Bank debt that is used to build the Lagos Ibadan rail line, which at least everybody can see that and everybody can understand that that's a place that is paying back itself because the Chinese are still the one running the facility and they are paying back themselves. So one can see that, but some of these other ones that we hear every day to fund budget to, Nigerians are not seeing it. I'm not seeing it because we still see, our roads infrastructure is still in the most dilapidated position. We're not seeing power improving. We're not seeing so many things that we're not seeing our health situation improving. We're not seeing education improving. So we're not seeing some of those things improving for which these debts are meant for. So Nigerians will question that the rationale. And let us try and see how we can stop further borrowing and be able to manage what we have to be able to exceed the debt club in no distant time.
Alesta, you mentioned the domestic borrowing. Can you explain how domestic borrowing through, the FGN fund, the FGN bonds, Sukuk, and Treasury bills affect inflation?
Okay, no, those are part of economic stabilization policy. And the truth of the matter is Nigerians will be very happy that the Treasury bills, because Treasury bills is the recurrent FGN, what do you call it now? Fiscal stabilization policy measure that mop up excess liquidity from the system. So it doesn't affect inflation. As a matter of fact, it helps to moderate inflation. If you see that since the FGN bond become very, very lucrative, that is the interest rate went up, the bonds and the Treasury bills, interest rate went up. A lot of Nigerians got interested in it. And so they all invested in it. As a matter of fact, I play heavily in that market. And so the federal government used that as a mop-up mechanism and to provide for them short-term funds to be able to use in funding budgets. So it's a very, very veritable. And then when the interest rate became very, very attractive, a lot of Nigerians invested in it, and a lot of Nigerians are still invested in it. And so long as we maintain some element of stability between interest rates and begin to watch how inflation is, I can see from the data of the MPS, inflation is coming down. Right. I think we are now at 22% or thereabouts from about 27. So it is part of those mechanisms. And those things constitute part of the debt that the federal government is using. Of course, they use those money to fund the budget. So my problem here is just, so let me make this point, is the external borrowing. If we can ramp up enough domestic borrowing through those kind of bonds, the FGN bond, the Treasury bills, and the Sukuk bond, if we can ramp up that domestically, it helps the economy because it will stabilize the economy. It will help to reduce, to drag down the inflationary trend of the economy, and then we'll have a long-term stability. And of course, Nigeria out of it too.
Aliyu, I beg to come to your end and just get your thoughts on some of the things that Alesta said. Are you in agreement? Are you for? Are you nay with some of the stances that he has made?
Right. I think I quite agree with him because, federal governments actually want to monitor how money is in circulation. They want to also have the control over what is in circulation because that's when that instrument government actually used to manage what we have. But by and large, I think debt as it were, it's never a bad instrument to actually bring up about development. But I think I have issue with debt to service budget. Maybe government can actually change the pattern that debt to service budget, maybe we can actually avoid that and use debt to actually look into some projects that will be singled out. Like I mentioned, Ibadan, Lagos rail. We can also mention Kaduna, Abuja rail. So if we can have a direct thing that we're using it to, because it's actually affecting our economy. The more you borrow, the more there is need for. In fact, the worst thing is that we use most of the money that revenue we are generating to service debt. And when you use money to service debt, that simply means that debt servicing would have eroded what is supposed to be used for capital projects. And that's why when we say capital project, it simply means infrastructure for Nigerians. So, and that is the major focus. So I think government should tarry, since we have more money, according to the federal government, from first subsidy removal. I think we can slow down on the level at which we are actually borrowing. And we must also engender our fiscal discipline. We must also diversify our economy, because if we can get more money from other sectors, we can actually use that to better the lots of Nigeria compared to borrowing every now and then.
Now, thank you. Finally, Aliyu, what would a responsible debt management strategy look like in the short to medium term for Nigeria, especially under the current economic conditions?
Every debt must have the plans. It must also always be in the budget, in the planning at the beginning of the year. Like you rightly said, top countries in the world, America, China, Japan, they are the highest debt, but you can trace the impact of the debt on the developments in the country. So we must start to begin. And the oversight lies on the National Assembly. The onus is on the National Assembly to make sure that they do their proper oversight function on every debt. So if we want to get a debt, it must be tied to a project, and they should not actually approve budget for a kind of recurrent expenditure, what will not have a meaningful impact on people. So if we want to have a sustainable debt structure, it should be a debt that will actually have a project impact on Nigerians.
Aliyu, thank you so very much. Alesta as well, thank you so much for your time and your feedback.